our MageHub podcast. We're going to be talking about the Arcane rework, and based on every other episode going to nearly 2 hours, we're going to try and get stuck right in. So, if anyone hasn't seen it, there is an Arcane rework that has been posted on Alpha. I guess I'll start. I'll sort of read through this, and then at each block, I'll ask you guys for your thoughts. So, some Arcane Mage changes hitting the alpha. So the goals of these are to allow you to acquire each specialization's core gameplay with less talent point investment, simplify the rotation complexity, provide new nodes that can help adapt your damage profile to better match a given encounter, provide competitive choice nodes that let you opt out of complex gameplay, and specific to Arcane, we will start with Radiant Spark. So apparently they believe it's had the long reputation of being one of the most complicated and skill expressive specializations in World of Warcraft. Trade chat might disagree. But a large contributor they see is Radiant Spark, asking to optimize the rotation. So its damage bonus was substantial, punish you for using arcane missiles, and it's scripted to burn too much. And with the introduction of shifting power and the use of mini burns, they don't really like the scripting that's in that. So they don't think it's exciting or challenging that their memorization should play such a large part, and Arcane's burn gameplay should support and be enhanced by the mechanics and talents you have, not circumvent them. So they're confident that removing Radiant Spark in its current fashion is the right path forward. They claim that the soul of Radiant Spark will live on through a new talent called Mage Spark, which we will get into later. But yeah, Porum, do you want to kick off with your thoughts on the Radiant Spark removal?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. It sucks needing a bunch of macros to try and optimize things. It sucks having to stop casting, right? Like, that's not intuitive design. Radiant Spark has been nothing intuitive since its inception. And the one funny thing about this, though, is they claim that the shifting power added a mini burn to Arcane, is what they say in this thing. I don't know if that's like a typo or if the person who wrote this up just didn't understand it quite as much.
Got GPT?
Yeah, exactly.
Might have wrote this. Yeah, what about you, DJen? Any strong thoughts on Radiant Spark?
I think I really disagree with them saying it's complicated or anything like that. It's really simple, like at its base. The problem is we as players are always going to be degenerates and try to optimize, which leads us to doing things like getting a mana divining stone or lagging our client via weak auras, or, any of those solutions that have propagated over the last couple of years to try and maximize that. I think from a design standpoint, Radiant Spark is good, but the implementation of it left these gaps that we were trying to solve as players, and they just couldn't solve it, so it needs to go. And I have no qualms about that. Rest in piss.
Yeah, I definitely felt it it was a shell ever since Harmony got nerfed. I love the mad combos in Shadowlands, but yeah, it's not been good. Yeah, it's possible that Porum's macros are the sole reason that Radiant Spark got removed, but I'll let viewers make their own minds up on that.
I'm good with that.
So next up is opt-in complexity. So this is something that has definitely been a theme in all three mage specs. I'm not sure, I haven't paid attention to other classes, but it's definitely been something they've been going for with all three mage specs. So they're interested in preserving Arcane's legacy as a skill expressive specialization, but must also recognize that there's a considerable population of Arcane mages who engage with the specializations for its visual identity and fantasy, and less over the challenging gameplay. So they think it doesn't support simpler playstyles, and thus less informed Arcane mages will produce very middling results. I'm assuming they have the stats on that to support that. But similar to other trees across the game, Arcane Mage tree is getting some choice nodes and supporting talents that are meant to provide meaningful throughput while offsetting some of the specialization's complexity. As with Fire Mage, we plan on tuning the more challenging talents to be the most competitive choices, but we'll be making sure the gap between a complex talent and its simpler alternative is small enough that you don't feel like you're making a huge mistake. Anything you want to call out on this before we get into the talent tree? Is there any big changes here that stand out?
Just their overall idea here of Arcane being this super complex thing, I think I think that's not true in this day and age. I think Arcane is the easiest of the 3 mage specs right now. It has that very high initial learning curve where you have to read Porum's manifesto on Wowhead and go step by step till you get it. But at its core, it's a very simple rotation. It's very scripted. It's very repetitive. Once you get it down, you can do it every time. So I kind of disagree with their thought process here, but we'll see how it ends up, I guess.
I agree. From like a min-max perspective, Arcane is not super complicated, right? It's so scripted that like once you get that script down, which happens with every spec, right? Even a reactive proc building spec, you still have some scripting that goes on there where you prepare for the proc and then your proc means you do XYZ, right? I also think like if you wanted to reduce the current version of Arcane's complexity, you just get rid of harmonic echo, and that simplifies Spark a ton. Harmonic echo was a huge part of the problem with Spark's design. I think also like reducing shifting or Siphon Storm to 15 seconds would do a huge round for that as well. I think the mana burn component of the Siphon Storm opener is a big problem for people to kind of wrap their heads around and understand what they should be doing with their cooldowns.
And on that note, sorry, just real quick though, on that note, their way of buffing Arcane over the last like year or two has been extending Touch of the Magi's duration, which actually, in my opinion, makes the spec harder. Because now you have to like get the timings down for different fights, and like, oh, if I press it now, it's going to pop at exactly the right time. That's not the tuning switch they should be using.
Yeah. There's also been weird scenarios where like didn't want a longer touch. Like, remember that was our tier set in, what's the last raid of Shadowlands called?
What's Sepulchre?
Sepulchre. That was our tier set, but then like on the intermission, the ads didn't live long. You needed to kill the ad like before in less than the touch duration.
It was Zymox, right? You got to the platform and you had like 10 seconds before the DK killed whatever was there. So you really had to like, you actually didn't even wear 4-piece on the set if you were trying to like parse on farm. You would just run 2-piece so you didn't have the extended touch and you'd get the explosion on the ad platforms.
And it was the same with the boss where it had like the 4 big ads in the 4 corners on the intermission and you went to 2 and killed 2. Like you had to kill them faster than like an extended touch.
Yeah, Lahuvum.
Yeah, that one. So yeah, there are weird scenarios. I don't think touch duration's good. But I was going to say, I wonder how much of like the perceived complexity of Arcane is in it being like the only DPS spec with a relevant mana bar. Like, if you're just not paying attention to that and you run which I'm guessing is something that happens for like average players, like you're just done, right? And
maybe I've lost my perspective, but mana does not seem to be something I actively really track. Like, oh, I'm at 60% barrage and I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, if you're barraging regularly, it won't come up, but...
Mana's one of those things, though, where it's like, if you play really well with it, you just don't notice it. And if you play really bad with it, you're absolutely bricked because of it, right? And it just doesn't really feel good. And then on top of it, you have the weird complexity of Arcane using similar mana regeneration formulas that healers use. So you have weird things like Avocation's coding where it's like restoring mana and it has that point where it jumps and ticks at 75%. There's just a lot of weird complexities caused by mana still being a relevant thing, even though it's kind of irrelevant, like Deachin said at the same time, right?
Yeah, I think one of the issues, and I think they tried to accomplish it with Arcane Surge, but didn't really, was like you can't really convert mana into damage outside of your cooldowns. Like to me, if mana is going to be super relevant, like mana is your cooldown, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
But
yeah, I actually had the thought. I had the thought the other day that like if you wanted mana to be relevant, you just get rid of Surge and you get rid of Evo, or you do something different with them. But either way, basically you would just make it so every 10% mana you spend, you get a stacking damage buff or something like that. That's a way you make mana relevant, right? So that way you have like an alt. The problem is with that though is it makes Arcane's damage profile extremely flexible, right? You would be able to blow your load at any point in the fight and kind of dictate that, and that might be a bit too powerful.
Yep. I mean, yeah, that's been my thinking for a while. So at the point where you're not accomplishing that, it's kind of like, well, should we just delete mana at that point? But,
Yeah.
As a fire main, I support deleting mana.
Yeah.
I had the thought in BFA that they were going to do something with it like they did with Maelstrom for Shamans. But they just... I was hoping it would be like Arcane Power or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Arcane Missiles. So, Arcane Missiles damage and excitement. I get very excited when I cast Arcane Missiles. Was difficult to balance alongside its accessibility. So, if Arcane Missiles ever became too powerful, it would dominate Arcane's rotation. aka, just use it as your filler instead of Arcane Blast. So, by restricting it to only be castable when you have clear casting, it enables us to increase its damage and expand its range of effects in a more healthy way without compromising the rest of the rotation. I would give them a lot more credit for this if it isn't literally how it worked like 2 expansions ago. Yeah, Porum, do you want to give thoughts here?
I mean, it took them 4 years to admit they fucking made the wrong decision with this, right? Like, it's definitely something that was obviously a mistake when they did it, and has had multiple degenerate rotations come out of it, right? We had the entirety of Shadowlands Kyrian, and then we also had the BFA Shadowlands pre-patch where you were stacking Arcane Pummeling, the Azurite trait, and it was literally just spam missiles until So it's just been one. And then you have Dragonflight, right, where they've had to completely tune missiles to be irrelevant because they wanted to avoid the Shadowlands rotation. And yeah, it just hasn't really worked great for sure.
And now we clip our missiles, which is so engaging and fun.
Yep. Give me my buff and go away. Okay, clear casting effects. So we've observed that there's been some frustration around effects that key into consuming clear casting. Since there can rarely be long streaks where players won't get a proc, we're watching the discussion around these effects and being sensitive to the frustration these effects might cause. Sun Fury and Spell Slinger both grant increased access to clear casting, which should smooth out the rate at which you receive clear casting and quell some of that frustration. I don't have anything to say on this. I was like, I read this and was like, it's like there's been frustration, and I was like, oh, right, has there? Okay. Like, yeah.
I think part of this is from people's feedback on the trees being tied to clear casting so heavily, and then in AoE you don't really generate much, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, this to me just says, all right, we're gonna see how this plays out first before we do anything. So okay.
Yeah, I mean, they've put so much weight onto clear casting in these hero trees, and now in the new talent tree, that there was going to be a lot of frustration. And if they don't nail the tuning on these procs, there's going to be a lot of frustration. But right now, it's just kind of whatever, because we're only using it to get NP anyway.
Yeah. Okay, and finally,
That is
the
funny.
complexity.
Sorry.
Oh.
Somebody in chat said it really well, actually. They write this entire paragraph and then put the 2-piece into the talent tree. Like the stacking buff, right? That's based off clear casting. It's funny.
Yeah, and the 4 pieces there too, right? Or it's in like a different iteration?
Yeah,
It's a separate node.
They're separate nodes, but they're built together now as one package instead of like separate bonuses like they are with the set.
Yeah. Okay. Complexity. So increasing the approachability of Arcane Mage was a big pillar in this talent tree redesign. We hope that some of you have been intimidated by Arcane's complexity will give the specialization another shot. And then, blah, 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 give us feedback. Yeah, this last paragraph was definitely written by ChatGPT. Okay. Shall we jump into the tree itself? Or we go through things that were removed. So I'm going to just bring up the live talent tree, and we'll just quickly cover the nodes that are not going to be in the next tree. So we'll start off. Mana Gem and its associated capstone are gone. And Radiant Spark and its associated capstone are gone. Porum, do you want to kick off with your thoughts on these removals?
Ding dong, right? Nobody liked Mana Gem. It was defunct. It didn't work like it ever should have. They fixed one of the bugs with it and never addressed the large quality of life issue that you needed an add-on to manage it. Couldn't be happier about that. Cascading was never bad in idea. The idea to have on-demand clear casting procs is a terrific idea. It just wasn't really tied in a way that you could leverage it or manipulate it in any way because of Mana Gem's particular port piece in the sequence, right? Of how you do your burst. And then, obviously, Radiant Spark, we kind of already touched on. Not going to miss it.
Yeah. With Mana Gem, I always find it really weird that it's like, it has the exact same cooldown as Arcane Surge, gives you a damage buff, and it's like, okay, well, let me guess how this is going to get used.
Yeah. And it's like, it gives you mana right after you spend it all, right? And then Enlightened is there as a extremely potent carrot for you to use that Mana Gem as quickly as possible after Surge to get that damage bonus.
Yeah, and then Foresight is gone, Reverberate is gone, both are kind of whatever, and Nether Tempest is gone. Nether Tempest one is a weird one. I didn't see that one coming. I'm kind of glad it's gone. It's nice to have a button to press while moving, but I think apart from that, I hate everything else about this spell.
It generally doesn't feel great. I think the biggest concern with Nether Tempest is that it's a huge procer for Arcane Echo, and having Arcane Echo lose those multiple procs in a second that Nether Tempest was providing is kind of going to be a big hit for it damage-wise. I actually disagree with you on Reverberate. I'm going to miss Reverberate a lot. I think Reverberate speeds up the AoE rotation tremendously, especially when you get like a clear casting proc and you get a Reverberate proc on both of your explosions. And sometimes, that can be a bit bad because the second Reverberate proc you can't really react to well before you've queued something else up, right? But I think overall, I feel like I've leveraged Reverberate more than I've ever seen the over munching issue.
Yeah, in Mythic Plus, Reverberate was definitely a really nice quality of life, especially on this packs where you're just not hitting like the Orb Barrage procs. Reverberate was there to kind of like smooth it out and make sure you could still contribute. Because pressing Arcane Explosion, 4 times in a row is not very fun. As far as Foresight goes, I was surprised it was in the tree to begin with. Was it a Legendary that it started as? Morgana's Foresight, and then...
Yeah. We used to call it Foreskin. It was actually really bad and not used at all in Legion either.
Yeah.
It was remarkable it ever showed up here to begin with, right?
Terrible. No one cares about it. We have enough mobility and ways to do micro movement as a mage. I don't know why it's in here. Rest in piss. Goodbye.
Yeah, like that's... I know, I can just imagine someone in like the Blizzard office just like smoking a massive joint and he's like, right lads, what if I put the worst legendary from Legion into the Arcane tree? Like, how funny would that be? And then it's like, they got the release and it's like, did anyone take that out?
They paid the intern and they just did a database dump of all the previous mage effects and selected them at random for the first Arcane tree, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, look, all these mages, it was their first legendary they ever equipped. It must be great, right?
I got stuck with Pride as.
I got Blink Chest. It was rough.
I got Lustring. I banged out. I got lucky. I also didn't start my mage until Nighthold.
I've actually seen a lot of negative feedback on the Mana Gem removal in Ultra Time. There's been a lot of people saying, like, no, this is a super cool, unique ability. It makes me feel like this arcane master. I'm storing my stuff, whatever. I don't know why. I macro it. I don't think I've ever thought about it except when Porum's Weak Aura pops up and I have to conjure it mid-fight while I'm downstairs with the bomb and Sark. I don't get it.
I mean, they're not wrong in that it's a unique spell because you need an add-on to make the spell work.
I mean, it's good fantasy. It's not bad fantasy, right? It even the buff is like something like gem dust or something, like you're snorting the gem or whatever after you crack it open, which is hilarious. You know, mages throughout fantasy do drugs too, right? So it's kind of fitting actually in some ways. But like it just functionally, it just never really worked out. It should have always been, you know, conjure mana gem wasn't the spell you got. You just got mana gem, and it was just a button you clicked and it did things, right. It didn't need to be this item in your inventory. I remember in Vadi I ran out of bag space and I was like, why the fuck isn't my macro working? You know, like really upset about what I'm doing, and I realize I'm like, shit, I'm such an idiot. My bag's full and I can't use a spell in my spell book because of it.
The worst part about it is I'm pretty sure they fixed most of the bugs for Mana Gem in Classic WoW. But then just didn't port it over to retail.
Yeah. Good fun. Right. On to our new tree. Okay, do you want me to skip anything that's not new? Yeah?
I want to talk a little bit about the positioning of things. So, like, none of these talents in the top node are new at all, right? There's Charged Orb, there's Concentrated Power. Some of them are moved up. They were like tier 2 talents, and now they're tier 1 talents. But like, I'm super worried about Charged Orb and Arcane Tempo. A little less so for Arcane Tempo because improved clear casting isn't as good in AoE, and Arcane Tempo is really good in AoE, so there's some incentive there. But Charged Orb, surprisingly, it's a good quality of life spell, but it's not really as high damage as some of our other toolkit abilities. And Concentrated Power is 100% pick all the time in every situation. So like it might be the death of Charged Orb, which I don't think is going to be a popular thing.
And we're losing Reverberate, and now Charged Orb is going to be a lot more difficult to path to when you're playing those AoE talents. So you're kind of losing like a double factor of quality of life when you're not hitting the procs, because you know I have to spam Arcane Explosion 4 times now. I can't just rely on my second orb because I'm not proccing. I can't just get a Reverberate proc. So I think that's going to feel really bad if we can't find a way to get to it.
Yeah, I think I spoke about this in the fire tree, where whenever you're like constructing a tree, like stuff that's really important for gameplay, but like isn't good numerically, you want to put in places where like, not like you have to take it, but like you kind of have to take it to get to something else. We might talk about similar things based on like Slipstream and Palm and stuff like that later in the tree. They kind of fall into a similar boat, but yeah, I'll try and build like, let's say I'll build a single target raid build like I did with fire. So we'd like skip Charged Orb, come down here, pick up these. Do we want to?
I don't think we take tempo.
You don't think we take tempo? Okay.
No, you don't. You don't need it, and so I don't think it's going to be something we pick up in single target.
Another thing that is probably just worth quickly pointing out is that Nether Precision now also affects Arcane Barrage as well as Blast. I guess it's probably
that's huge, actually.
Yeah, they just probably don't.
It's specifically huge for Spellslinger, sorry, because Spellslinger, the splinters trigger off Nether Precision consumption, right? So they kind of needed to do that for AoE to work correctly for Spellslinger.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to say, I guess you get the same number either way, but yeah, that does make it really big on AoE, because it didn't even click with me there that like Nether Precision was completely useless on AoE today. So yeah, that's good.
Tempo might not actually have that high of a pick rate if you're playing Sun Fury, because you're going to be having the 3% haste per clear casting with your mana addiction. So that's what stacks up to 10 times. That's 30% haste. So
yeah, I would say Sun Fury is probably the hero talent that's most incentivized to the barrage and use orbs to recover charges during cooldowns, right? Because of incandescence.
So just with all that additional haste coming in, I don't know if Arcane Tempo will be a very high pick rate, even in Mythic Plus, which means we might be able to get over Charged Orb for that quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's also worth pointing out that these two nodes, Crackling Energy and Improved Arcane Missiles, are actually 1-point nodes, correct?
Yeah.
Or was that later in the tree? Yeah, so...
No, those two and the one later, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're watching this on Twitch or YouTube and looking at the Wowhead tree, these are showing up as 2 points right now, but they are actually 1 point. So I'm assuming we would be able to take both pretty easily. We probably want Eureka. Seems quite good. An Amplification. Let's say we'll skip Arcane Cleave for now.
I think when it's single target, Amplification is definitely a take. I'm not sold on Eureka though. But you might have to take it just to get deeper into the tree though. But it's possible that, or no, I'm sorry, Eureka's not the one I was thinking of. I was thinking of Illuminated Thoughts. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, is this not just 25% Arcane Missile damage, basically?
Yeah. No, that's very good, yeah.
Eureka and Amplification, especially with the tier 31 set being baked into the tree, are going to be very big for overall.
Yeah. Okay, and then Arcane Bombardment is the same. Illuminated Thoughts has been reworked, right? So clear casting, this is different, right? Slightly different. Today it just has the first part where clear casting has a 5% increased chance to proc, but it also increases the damage of spells that consume it. They have gone quite ham on buffing Arcane Missiles, it seems. So I guess we take that. We have to either take Slipstream or Mana Adept to get into Touch of the Magi. This might be this thing that saves Slipstream.
So Porum and I were talking about this before. I really hate this pathing because for damage, you're going to want Mana Adept, at least in single target, because that's a slightly more mana you get to spend throughout the fight. Slipstream is that huge quality of life. Meanwhile, 2 nodes down, we have Chrono Shift, which I absolutely love and every Arcane absolutely loves, and it's just impossible to path through. So if they were to swap Chrono Shift and Mana Adept, you'd have the option between these 2 mobility nodes going into Touch of the Magi, which would just be huge as far as like being able to specialize for a fight. But instead you're picking between damage and utility, which has been the downfall of a lot of Arcane trees. And I hate that for Arcane. Because anytime you have a choice between utility and damage, you pick damage.
Yeah. I think it's similar to the charged orb thing, but I was thinking like, if you're going to compete with a damage talent, damage quotation marks, Mana Adept is maybe the best one to be competing with. It's definitely droppable. But yeah, I do agree that if you put Chrono Shift there, be good.
Historically, it's been very weak, yeah. I think that kind of also scales with the expansion you're in, right? Because of how our mastery works and mana regen around it. So like Mana Adept is a lot better back in body than it is in season 4 today, right?
Arcane scales with stats confirmed. You heard it here.
Yeah.
Okay, let's be greedy and take Slipstream. Then we go Touch of the Magi. Savant is a 1-pointer as well, right?
Yeah.
Right, so Savant's a 1-pointer. Man, everything in this tree is just like damage.
It's just percent modifier, percent modifier, percent modifier.
Yeah, so let's say we take 2 points there. Impetus. And then let's say we had 2 points in this. Or let's say there's 1 point in that. We'll pretend we have 2 more points than we actually have.
I think you would take Familiar still. And I'm not sure about the Energized Familiar talent underneath it still. That's kind of going to come down to Sims, right? But I think Familiar on its own is still going to be a very high value single target talent point.
Yeah.
But now we're getting into the most questionable decision of this tree, which is rule of threes still exists.
I thought you were going to talk about the one below that.
Oh no,
that's questionable one as well. Yeah.
That is a very questionable one. But we'll start with rule of threes. So as it stands, rule of threes is when you gain your 3rd arcane charge, the mana cost of your next AB or AM is reduced by 100%. We don't care about that because we're just trying to stay at four charges as long as possible. That's our entire rotation right now. We only dump those charges when we're running out of mana. So it's a very useless talent that I don't think has been picked a single time in Dragonflight.
Well, the biggest reason is it doesn't spend mana. Spells that keep us from spending mana right now are huge damage losses because of the clear casting Nether Precision loop. And they've actually, even worse than just keeping Rule of Threes, they've kind of doubled down on it, but we'll talk about that later on with the talent in the capstone tier.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Well, we move down to this one then. So there's now a choice node. It's Presence of Mind, same as it is on live, and Wizened Wit, which is the cast time of Arcane Blast is reduced by 10%. So we have utility talent versus very strong damage talent. Again, I don't really know what's happening here.
I mean, right now...
Go ahead,
Porum. Porum, go.
Porum, go.
All right. So, Presence of Mind right now, right, it's used as a damage talent, but it's worth so incredibly low amount of damage. It's not difficult to leverage that, but it's only about 0.5% when used optimally, right? However, it's an extremely strong mobility spell, though, right? Like if you need to spend Nether Precisions and you're on the move, let's say Farak when you're running from balls, right? It's a really optimal time to to pull up, a clear casting, have a couple of palm charges, barrage into orb because you're running for an extended period of time, right? And then Wizened Wit, I was mixed feelings on it at first because when they first published this, I didn't know how exactly it was going to work. Is it going to take blast cast time below the GCD such that you're hitting the GCD every time that you cast blast? Or is it going to reduce the GCD? Well, I got alpha recently, and it does reduce the GCD, so it's not even close. This is Wizened Wit is probably one of the strongest talents in the second tier because of 10% off blast cast time. That's an insane amount of damage there, in my opinion.
I personally really like Palm as it exists right now, and I'm kind of sad that it's not going to be picked. I'm not a great arcane mage, so on fights like Smolderon, where I need to move during my spark, I was using Palm to stack up my spark while I was moving. That's super nice, but I guess now with the removal of Spark, it's not that big of a deal for situations like that because you can AM into Magai's Spark or whatever it is. But they're putting an incredibly strong damage node here against what is essentially utility, and that just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and not to mention, it also leads into Siphon Storm, which is historically our strongest talent in the tree. So it's you're really going to want to go that path. It's going to be a huge amount of damage, and that's true for single target and M+, right?
Yeah. Like I was saying earlier with utility talents, the way Palm is structured right now in the tree, you don't feel bad for taking it because it's it goes into Evocation and Siphon Storm. So you don't pick it and be like, oh man, I've lost damage. This could be a damage talent. Whereas now it is going to feel like that. Even if this wasn't a choice node, you can still get down to Evo from Arcane Battery, which is maybe not the best choice ever. But yeah, if we keep building out, we probably go Evocation, Siphon Storm. Siphon Storm's the same as it is on live, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it's 14%.
Okay, and Arcane Battery is 2 points, despite every other 2-pointer in the tree being 1 point. For some reason. But yeah, it's consuming clear casting, grants increased spell damage. It is it the 2 set or is it a modified version of the 2 set?
It's the 2 set.
Yeah, so it's the 4 set that's modified slightly. So these 2 talents are our 2 set and our 4 set on live, except they're modified to work with each other. So Arcane Battery is just the 2 set, and Aether Attunement is whenever you gain 5 stacks of Arcane Battery, you get the 4 set proc today.
I don't think anyone's surprised by those sticking around. It's a very fun tier set that people really enjoy, and they made some really cool animations for it. So I'm happy to see them stay.
I'm happy to see Cleave Missile stay, but I think there's some issues with how it's being implemented here, a couple of different ways. There's also Time Loop, too. We didn't mention that, but that's another talent that comes off of Arcane Battery and gives you a chance to stack multiple Arcane Batteries with a repeating chance to do so for each proc. So like you can, get your Aether Attunement and 5 stacks really quick or something like that. It could happen. The thing I don't like is that with the Aether Attunement, you don't retain your damage buff. So you actually, like, when you get the clear casting missiles, your missiles are going to hit hard, but then you're back to, the bottom of Incanter's flow, essentially, right? And this gives Arcane... So as we'll see, there's another stacking buff later on in a different part of this capstone tier. So this gives us Incanter's flow. This gives us the Arcane Battery buff. This gives us the, missiles to stack or whatever that you're looking at. Like, there's just going to be a lot of stacking buffs, and I'm kind of worried about the fire bloat getting carried into Arcane with that.
I was doing some paper math based on this pathing here, because we have the Aether Attunement, the 4-piece, heading into Arcane Harmony, which, for every stack of missiles gets a 5% buff on your barrage, blah, 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 blah. So there could be a world where we take, which we'll talk about later, Magi Spark. We can AM into our Spark with the 4-piece into a massive barrage on the back end. So I don't know if this is in line with Blizzard's thinking of simplifying the complexity, because you can get pretty degenerate with this very quickly.
For what it's worth, I actually think I have Arcane Harmony and Aether Attunement kind of as a maybe in a single target build. I think it'll kind of come down to their tuning against the Laysite Lay Drinker and the Siphon Storm Evocation combo. You're going to take some of those, but you're not going to be able to take them all. I think Lay Drinker is going to be very hard to avoid. We can talk about that later, but I'm not sure that Aether Attunement and Harmony are going to be part of a single target build and not part of a cleave build instead.
Yeah, and I wouldn't disagree, but I really like this pathing heading down into Harmony compared to what we have now. I think they have really good synergy together, and it's a really good design decision.
Yeah, I've also just realized that if you just take Arcane Battery and not Aether Attunement, can you just keep the damage buff and never lose it?
Yes. Yep.
Seems a little bit nonsense.
So
Okay.
either you get the 10% buff or you get cleaving missiles, but you can't have both, right?
But on the downside, you're taking that buff and now you have to maintain it, so you're spamming shit between pools.
Yeah, I mean, it stacks pretty quick and it lasts a while, especially if you have time loop. Although I suppose you probably don't want time loop because you'll just stack it up to 5 and then keep it there.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, for what it's worth too, they also buffed the duration on it too. They buffed it 5 seconds, which should help immensely, honestly. Because 20 seconds is just enough to you get bad luck and it's gone, right?
Yeah.
I didn't even notice that. That is kind of nice.
Okay, time for the big banger in the middle here. So, choice node, one of them is improved Touch of the Magi. So, Touch of the Magi accumulates 25% damage instead of 20% damage. And the other one is what they see as the spiritual successor to Radiant Spark, which is your Touch of the Magi now also conjures a spark, which increases the damage dealt by your next Arcane Barrage, Arcane Blast, and Arcane Missiles by 25%. So it's not like a buff with 3 stacks where it's the next 3 spells. It's like the next one of each spell. Mm-hmm. And then once you've cast one of each of those spells, the spark will explode, dealing damage to all nearby enemies. Porum, do you want to kick off with your thoughts on Magi Spark?
Yeah, I really like it. It's not really a spiritual successor to Radiant Spark. You have a lot more control about it, and the window of time for it is a lot more flexible. The duration of touch is a pretty long window, right? And you can kind of choose when to send that third spell, right? Because if you're in AoE, you're very likely going to use missiles and barrage potentially, or rather barrage and potentially missiles. And then blast will be your trigger, right? And then in single target, you're very likely to use blast and missiles and have barrage be your trigger. So you can really leverage that, and whether you're taking the talent beneath it that it leads into will probably dictate some of that. Which is, adds a bit of interesting component to how you utilize the Magi Spark and how you optimize for that. Additionally, it has a really cool animation. You get kind of the Algalon star signs around your character for each of the buffs, and when you spend them, you get a huge purple explosion at your totem target. So I think it'll be really gratifying to play Magi Spark.
Yeah, I never noticed the little star signs. My one concern is like, whenever you're in CDs and then you barrage, you're sort of like dropping charges and sort of like killing your damage a bit, especially with this like nether munitions talent that's like gives you a damage buff after you consume it. I think there's going to be a little bit of conflict there.
I think part of that is actually resolved by the hero talent trees. So like in Sun Fury, you have the Burden of Power, Glorious Incandescence after you gain a Spellfire Sphere. And so if you have a Spellfire Sphere gained during your or going into your CDs, you'll have that buff up, right? And you can use that on your barrage, and then you throw out your orb, and you'll get the Glorious Incandescent Meteorites. And that'll refill your charges, so you'll be good to go after that. It'll slow down maybe your next blast if you don't have a missile proc to go at that point, but I think it should be a pretty good loop for Sun Fury at least to always kind of utilize Magi Spark in that way. Spellslinger also gets some splinter generation from orb hits, so it's maybe not the worst thing. And I actually I think there might be some added incentive there for charged orb with those two trees because of those interactions. So hopefully there's hope for charged orb with that.
Yeah, one thing I did like about Shadowlands Arcane was your cooldowns were kind of like split into, right, you cast Arcane Power and you cast Touch, and then Touch doesn't last as long as Arcane Power, but like Touch was your real cooldown, and then once Touch ran out, it was kind of like the rest of your cooldowns were whatever. Like, I honestly wouldn't mind if it went back to that, like once Touch ends and you've used your Magi Spark, like you still have Arcane Surge up, but it's just kind of whatever, and then you're not left with like the not really long burst period, but compressing your damage into a smaller window is always a lot nicer.
Yeah, I would like to see them revert the Touch of the Magi back. I think it's still 12 seconds in the stream. I would like them to bring that back to about 10. But this node is weird. I think it's kind of in line with their thinking of providing like competitive alternatives for a simpler play style. Because I don't think a 5% buff on your Touch of the Magi is ever going to be a competitive option versus Magi Spark. So it seems kind of like a throwaway for like the more casual crowd. But I really like Magi Spark. I think it's a decent iteration on what used to be Radiant Spark.
I think I think the bonus the comparableness of improved touch and Magi Spark is going to come down to a lot of like how much haste you have and how many spells you can fit inside of touch, right? Because if you can store more damage into touch, Magi Spark singular spell buffs aren't going to be, you know what I mean? It'll start to balance out there. I think the next talent in the tree, Nether Munitions, actually kind of makes the decision really heavily weighted on Magi Spark because you can proc the munitions early in your touch window and stack the damage percentage gain. So I think there's a high risk there for that to be a problem for improved touch.
In a similar vein to Fire, I don't know if they've realized how much additional stuff they are adding here that's going to be tracked between both the hero talents and this tree. You have like 6 different like barrage modifiers in this tree. You have like 6 different arcane missiles modifiers in this tree, and then you're going to be cramming them into your Magi Spark. There's a lot going on that A is going to require weak auras, B is going to increase the complexity, and I don't know if that was a intentional design or if it's just a byproduct of picking cool things.
They kind of did a similar thing with Frost. I think it was whenever they reworked Frost, this expansion, where there's like, right, we'll just throw a lot of stuff at Frost and then like cull the least popular things, which I think ended up being like Ebb and Bolt. So they might do something similar here where it's like, okay, there's a lot of stuff in this tree. Let's see how Alpha plays out. Let's see what the least popular things are, and then we'll just like delete them. It's something that might happen because yeah, I think it is a similar problem as fire, where there's just a lot of random, like, minuscule things, but like they all add up.
The one good thing I will say, after playing on alpha, is Blizzard actually did a decent job at kind of giving players cues for some of these actions. So, like, when you get Burden of Power, your Arcane Blast and your Arcane Barrage light up. When you get a Glorious Incandescence, your Orb lights up. So I think that's like a really positive thing. Also, our Arcane Soul from the Sun Fury tree, you get like a purple Pyroblast or Pyroclasm spell alert. So like they're actually doing some measures to, maybe not mitigate the use of weak auras, but help the people who aren't using them a little bit, right? Although I do agree there's like way too much to track between this and like Spellfire Spheres and everything else. It is a lot.
I hate to break it to you, but I turned off my action bars like 4 years ago.
Yeah. And from an Arcane perspective, I really enjoy these stacking modifiers. I really enjoyed like Shadowlands, like building up the huge harmony on like Anduin or whatever, and just nuking everything in sight, just stacking everything all up at once. Like, got my rune down, my touch of magi is going. I got a full harmony ready to go. I love stacking that stuff, and I really like the bursty profile it brings. But I do think it can lead, again, to very degenerate play styles where we're doing things I don't think Blizzard intended. Like, there's no way they put together the current talent tree and decided to, we're going to do the current rotation. That's not something that they were imagining. It's something that Porum came up with, and now we're all doing, and they hate it.
Yeah.
Good, they should.
I have a random thought. Do any of you know how good Arcane Echo is without Nether Tempest?
Not very good.
It's losing a lot of value at that point. At 2 triggers a second, right? It's a big deal.
And I mean, it only scales off instances. So like, I mean, you're casting an Arcane. I mean, that's like 2 procs for every, maybe 3 procs for every off Nether Tempest for every like proc you get off Arcane Barrage, which is a bit, or not Arcane Barrage, Arcane Blast. Sorry. So yeah, that's not great. And then concentration. I'm guessing this has a similar issue as Rule of Threes.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about before. Is it's just not designed well. If it doesn't cost mana, we don't get clear casting, so it doesn't cycle into that feedback loop of missiles or explosion and then barrage or blast, right?
Yeah.
Porum, am I misremembering? I thought they had a Nether Tempest effect in one of the hero trees. Is that wrong?
No, in Spellslinger they had auto extension of Nether Tempest. It was removed with this build.
Okay, I missed that. I'm not mad to see that go, honestly. That didn't sound fun.
Yeah, they changed it to for 8 seconds. Or no, that's the wrong one I'm looking at, right? Yeah, for 8 seconds after being struck by an arcane orb, the damage gets redirected. They just removed the Nether Tempest part of that off. So I think that was the talent that had Nether Tempest on it.
Okay, I don't hate that, because looking at that early alpha, I was thinking that's a very uptimey spec type deal that Arcane doesn't really lend itself to.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest concern with that was Nether Tempest just hasn't felt good to cast in like a decade, right? I don't think
Ever.
since MOP, I haven't heard anyone say anything positive about it ever. It's just very low damage dot, right? It looks really cool, but it just doesn't have any oomph to it. It's got no impact.
Yeah.
But losing that Nether Tempest definitely brings down the value of Arcane Echo. And then on the other side of the split there, you have Concentration, which Porum and I were talking about is kind of just a DPS loss in a way, because you're not getting those brain fart.
No,
not you're not spending mana, so you're not getting your
clear casting.
Clear casting. Thank you.
Which doesn't give you, so you don't get into like the clear casting, Nether Precision loop.
Yeah, and that's what this whole rotation is built around, is getting that gameplay loop. So I think you just kind of have two semi-dead talents, and we're just going to skip straight down.
Yeah, I think there's room for Arcane Echo and AoE where it kind of shines a bit better. But I don't have much hope for it in single target. That's for sure. Not without Nether Tempest.
Yeah. So if we go down the right side of the tree, we have 2 points here. So we have Lay Sight, which is Nether precision damage bonus increased to 30%. Up from 20 would be quite good. And then Lay Drinker is every 6 times you consume Nether Precision, your next Arcane Blast echoes, so repeating its damage at 25% effectiveness to the primary target and up to 2 nearby enemies. What are your thoughts on this talent?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Lay Sight seems mandatory in all content, no matter what you're doing. That's just a huge buff to Nether Precision, which is a massive amount of just our baseline damage. Lay Drinker, I'm less like set on this one. Borum, have you tested the actual spread of that? What the logic is like on Alpha?
Yeah, it's similar to Deathborn. So I agree about Layside. I think that's going to be mandatory. I also think it's weird to add a talent that buffs Nether Precision when our whole rotation right now currently is built around maximizing Nether Precision already. But also with Lay Drinker, the thing I don't like about it, like I said, it worked like Deathborn. It's got a decent cleave range because of that. I think Deathborn worked off of like the newer Splitting Ice kind of cleave logic. But the issue with this one is that it's built off of 6 charges. And when you build up Nether Precision, that means you're spending your 6th charge, and then your next blast you don't have a charge for. So it actually kind of encourages you to track that so that you can clip one of your Nether Precisions, right? You go 2, 2, 1, and then you have that opportunity to stack Nether Precision with the Lay Drinker buff. I had to look at the talent name.
Yeah, I'm not a massive.
About that.
I'm not a massive fan of Lay Drinker, and I think 25% at 2 targets really isn't that much. I think.
Well, it hits all 3 though.
It hits all 3.
Primary target too. I think it actually might be a really solid single target talent for that reason, especially because it's only 1 point past a mandatory talent that everyone's going to take in every situation, right? So it has a really easy path to get there.
And they made Barrage included into the Nether Precision, right? So you could Barrage for that last NP consumption or whatever. But I just don't think Lay Drinker, as far as like a cleave or an AoE talent, is going to be enough. Especially for Arcane, where you've always kind of been target capped to that 5, and we have our orbs right now that are doing absolutely insane things in mass AoE. But outside of that, Arcane is very like limited in what they can do. So I would not hate to see Lay Drinker become uncapped. It's just 25% of that AB to everyone in that little radius. I think that could be fun.
Or even square rooted or something like that as well, so it doesn't get out of hand.
Ooh,
I think Lay Drinker is going to be
Square Root's banned.
Yeah. I think Lay Drinker, the one nice thing about it is it gives you a reason to want to hit blast during Magi Spark. And I think that's really kind of what it's designed around.
Yeah. I think an interesting thing here is if Barrage contributes to Nether Precision, like it's weird that this doesn't buff Barrage as well, because I would also give it a role in AoE. Like I don't think Arcane Blast hitting 2 more targets for 25% damage is enough to make this good in AoE. So like I'd like to see this affect Barrage again.
On the flip side of that, Toe, you would then have another modifier to stack with your Harmony, to stack with your brand, to stack with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I am all about the big Barrage builds. Bring back Shadowlands.
It's funny too, Toe, that when you bring up the effectiveness of it too, because we already had an experiment with this, right? We had Deathborn. It did like 70% damage to a second target, or like 55% damage to 2 other targets, right? And you got to like 4 targets and you stopped using it, and you started using Arcane Explosion and Barrage again because it just Blast just can't keep pace with Arcane Barrage.
Yeah. So, yeah, think this talent needs a little bit of work. So, this is me filled out 30 talents, but we do have 3 floating talents, but I'll go over that in a second. But in the bottom right of the tree, we have our Arcane Cleave into Resonance into Orb Barrage. So I guess they're kind of just moving those Arcane Barrage, Cleavey, AoE talents to be more together, which I guess makes sense. Although you can get Resonance without Arcane Cleave, so it's still going to be people in Alter Time getting confused how this talent works, even when you don't have Arcane Cleave. But what I was going to say is, so this is our attempt at a single target build, but this is a 1 point. This, and this are 1-pointers, and Wowhead is wrong. So we actually have 3 more talents that we can hypothetically put into this tree. So I'm kind of wondering where they would go. It's maybe Attunement, Arcane Harmony, and Resonance, maybe?
Well, we have to keep in mind where the talent points are restricted to, right? The Prodigious Savant, we have 1 more point for the capstones. I definitely have the sensation that it's probably going to be Echo for like a pure single target build. And in a Cleave build, you might want to get Aether Attunement and cash in on the AoE missiles. It's hard to say for that one.
Yeah, so you're thinking, so if we had like 1 more point here, this would go here, but you're saying we'd have to drop something else to get...
because we're gated.
Yeah. So it has to be dropped at the bottom. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess we'd be picking up stuff higher up in the tree. So I guess maybe that is the savior of Arcane Orb.
Yeah. We have,
or Charged Orb, sorry.
We have 2 more points, right? I think Energized Familiar is probably going to come into play on single target. It's primarily already a single target ability, Arcane Familiar, and that just amps it up during Lust, which is a little annoying that we're still fucking tied to Bloodlust as a class, right? We still have some damage component that's like, when we do Lust, we get a little bit more out of it than everyone else in that regard. So, but at least in this way, it's a very, very, very minor amount. So I'm not super worried about it.
We did miss one of the biggest changes here, though. ARF is now tied to Arcane Intellect, so you don't have to do 2 buffs every time you wipe. You just hit Arcane Intellect and you're done. Huge quality of life.
Oh, I didn't even notice that. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, now when you AI, you get ARF.
I've never heard someone call that ARF.
We love ARF.
That is absurd. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure. I'm trying to figure out like where the gates are in terms of Wowhead doesn't really show them very well. Like, so if we had 2 more talents, they have to go in the middle block, right?
I think Arcane Tempo is a reasonable choice, depending on which hero tree you're playing. I think Energized Familiar is going to be in play just because not even because he's firing off more, but because he's giving you mana back. That can be useful. We love more mana. But the last one will probably just end up being a sim question.
Yeah.
I think Charged Orb has pretty good odds, actually, because of the Glorious Incandescence and in the Sun Fury tree specifically, because you're able to proc a bunch of meteorites with it, and you can, without Arcane Orb, I think the cooldown might be a little bit too long to cash in on that.
Yeah, although I suppose this runs into a similar issue that the Fire tree did, where it's like everything's gone to a 1-pointer, and whenever you like start filling out the tree, you just have almost everything anyway. You're really just saying like, okay, which 2 talents am I not taking? Which is maybe okay, but it doesn't seem like the point of these types of trees.
My single biggest complaint with this rework, other than a couple pathing issues like Chrono Shift, is it's still not allowing Arcane to pick up any of these utility talents like Supernova or Chrono Shift or Palm or whatever you want from in here. We still don't have the ability to get to that because there's so many of these just random effects that do damage And I really hate the philosophy of putting utility in the spec tree. I think that's what the class tree should be for, is all these utility points. And everyone should have access to them regardless of spec. So I think they kind of failed in that aspect, and I'm not sure why they keep doing it.
I think in some ways it can be done at least tastefully. I agree with you that it shouldn't be done at all, but I think there's ways to do it tasteful, like Toe referenced earlier with like Slipstream, right? If we swapped up Chrono Shift with that, you at least have to pick one of those nodes, right? The presence of mind, wise and wit one is absolutely bonkers to me. That's the easiest decision of anyone's life, and honestly, putting Slipstream up against the throughput talent, it creates a friction there that isn't gonna feel good for anyone, right? You're either gonna feel like, ah shit, I got a 99. I would have got 100 if I had spec mana adept, or I didn't have Slipstream, so I had to cancel a cast because I was trying to optimize my damage better, right? And it's just I don't think there's any world in which Arcane shouldn't have Slipstream. I think that should probably be fully baked into missiles at this point. And realistically, Chrono Shift should probably be baked into Barrage.
No.
I'm okay with some talent decisions having to be made, like Presence of Mind versus Foresight. I think was a decent push and pull there when it was in. But I really and I think Slipstream and Chrono Shift would be a decent push and pull, but you shouldn't have the incentive to not pick up any of the specs identity and quality of life spells because you are trying to min-max damage.
There's just also a few nodes here that should either be baseline or merged with another node. Like amplification should just be part of improved arcane missile or something like that. I don't think Chrono Shift should be baseline because I think that's a very powerful utility. I think that is something you should have to pick up in your tree. It would even make a good choice node with Slipstream. But like merge amplification in. I hate where Supernova's positioned because again, like Palm, you're not pathing through it to get anything relevant, so it's just kind of like off there in the corner for no reason. We have like all the AoE components of Barrage just split up and kind of peppered throughout. So we have like Arcane Bombardment next to Touch the Magi, but then Arcane Cleave and Resonance are down on the right hand side. So there's just a lot of like weird positioning in this tree that I'm not a big fan of.
Sorry, I saw you go into talk there too. The one really positive thing I am about this tree though is the capstone rework. I think is extremely promising to help kind of dethrone the Radiant Spark Siphon Storm combo that we've been like inescapable with in Dragonflight, right? I think Aether Attunement with Harmony, I think the Nether Precision and Ley Drinker talents are much more potent than the Mana Gem node was, right? And about a lot more diverse as well in how you can apply them. So I think it'll pay off.
Yeah. What you were saying about sort of saying like whether Chrono Shift should be baseline or not, I think there's like opportunities to like merge talents. So like Chrono Shift is maybe not worth it on its own, but okay, maybe if you stick it in with Arcane Tempo, maybe it becomes worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Same with Slipstream, and we were saying like amplification maybe doesn't belong on its own. It's maybe not enough and should be with improved Arcane Missiles, but then you can maybe put Slipstream in with that, and then some of those things don't feel quite as bad.
A real easy win for them is get rid of amplification, merge it with improved arcane or whatever, and then bring back reverberate and drop that where amplification is, and then you have that whole path leading down into like the AoE section. That would be a really easy win.
To be fair, one of the points about Reverberate's removal that I think one of their motivating factors for it is to generate more clear casting in AoE. And I think that actually does that pretty successfully. And maybe while the AoE rotation will be a bit slower when you don't get Orb Barrage procs, maybe that's a worthwhile exchange to be able to actually generate and interact with the hero trees in AoE.
And I think you touched on a very important note there. The validity of this tree and the 2 hero trees hinge entirely on the CC proc rate. If we don't have enough CCs, this is going to feel like garbage to play. If we have enough CCs, it's going to feel like one of the best iterations of Arcane you've ever seen. So I'm really interested to see how they account for that, because the current means of proccing CC is very inconsistent. I would love to see it become just like a baseline proc rate, so it's more predictable, it's more reliable.
Yeah,
but
they did call that out in the blue post, that like clear casting and like frustration around not getting it is like a big point. So they are like, I mean, they're aware of it enough that it got its own paragraph here. So hopefully they do actually action that. I was, we were saying there's sort of 2 floating points. I'm not like 22 points with the two pointers that are actually 1 pointers. And this is like the cutoff for the last gate. I was like, nah, I've looked at this again and I think Charged Orb is dead. Because there's probably a couple more talents that you, like this is us at functionally 20 talents. So, and that's maybe
yeah, so
like
we would get 2 more of these. It would basically be...
No, we don't have 2 talents because I'm at 22. You need 20 to get to the next gate. So this is me with 22, but these are...
Oh. Yeah. So we would get 2 more of the tier 2 or tier 1 talents, right? Since we have
because I have
Tackling and
I
Improved
have 2 points in each of these whenever they're 1 pointers, right? Because it's 20 to go to the last gate.
Mm.
So I'm saying
you're at 22. Okay, so this is a full tree. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So
I think from here we'd be Arcane Tempo and Improved Familiar, maybe?
No, I'm saying we don't have 2 points.
Okay.
This is us done.
Yeah, this is it.
So we'd have
That
to
kinda
drop
sucks.
something.
That kind of sucks.
Yeah, so no Arcane Tempo,
True.
no Energized Familiar, no Mana Adept, no Arcane Cleave. There's a lot of things you'd pick up before Charged Orb. It's maybe not great.
For sure.
So,
to be fair, I think Arcane Bombardment might not be quite as impactful for Spellslinger, for example, in a single target build. I don't think you're going to use Barrage quite the same.
And we're not really going over the hero talents right now.
Yeah, I get it.
Someone pointed out in chat a very good point. Spellslinger makes you take Supernova in order to use one of the effects. So you actually have 1 less point if you're a Spellslinger at this point.
So they need to buff Supernova about 200% for that to happen right now on Alpha. I did some napkin math in a sheet earlier on that, and it's still not keeping even remote pace with the damage requirement that talent point would need out of it.
I don't get this spell. Like, is this not supposed to be a C? Like, surely in Blizzard's head, you have like CC spells, damage spells. It's like similar with Dragon's Breath and Alexstrasza's Fury. Like, what are we doing with this thing? Because you can't just like half-ass it into a damage spell and expect that to function. You need to like commit to it being a damage spell, if you know what I mean. So yeah, not really a fan of that. We would love to go over hero trees, but we're already over an hour in.
Yeah. So. What they should do with Supernova is toss it in the class tree as a choice node with Blast Wave.
Yep.
I think maybe the gravity lap thing might throw a wrench in that. I was actually thinking against Ice Nova might be a better spot for it. They're both Novas. Seems mage enough, right?
At the same time, that would give us yet another stop in Mythic Plus, and the Shamans and Boomkins of the world will riot.
Yes, they have to have the most stops at all times. Okay. Anything else we want to call out on the tree? Any nodes you feel like were skimmed over, or you'd like to say something else on?
Or does chat have anything they want answered about it?
Yeah, do we want to do it some Q&A?
Yeah, if anyone in chat wants to ask any questions to the three of us, we'd be happy to answer. Like 90% of chat right now is just like delete spell, remove spell.
Die Supernova die.
3 feels way too cluttered on the bottom. Yeah, kind of agreed.
I actually am kind of surprised that they kept Mana Adept at all, since they baked kind of a 2% mana regen into the Energized Familiar. It just seems a bit weird, and it might actually be that Mana Adept isn't really worth taking over Slipstream in the long run, so that's probably a good thing, but also a weird thing that they're even still trying to tool around it.
I think swapping Mana Adept and Chrono Shift is the easiest win they could ever have in this tree.
Mana Adept strikes me as a new player talent. Like, even on the MageHub guide, I like to say that, like, if you're new to the spec, take this talent, but like, don't play it long term. I think they are riding the high of Kilt in Legion, because Arcane was just a different spec then. It was like a lot better for the spec then. It doesn't really need it as much now.
You also,
I don't think Blizzard have quite caught on to that.
In Legion, right, Barrage didn't really have a damage roll in the spec, right? It was more of a mana throttle and nothing else. So, like, you didn't hit it unless you needed mana, right? The rest of the time you wanted to hit missiles or Arcane Explosion and AoE, because it was tuned so much higher back then.
All right, so somebody asked, so what are we expecting will be the better hero spec for Arcane, Spellslinger or Sun Fury? I'll go first, and Porum, you can correct me and tell me I'm wrong. I think that if we're trying to preserve the burst identity, Sun Fury is really leaning into that. And Spellslinger is going to have a lot, not a lot, but a much more flatter profile, which kind of takes away from Arcane's identity. And I think Sun Fury just has better synergy with the build they're trying to do here.
I definitely think it's going to come down to content a bit. I think Spellslinger is going to have a really good niche and like constant damage, and in Mythic Plus especially, because of how frequent Spellstorm procs and AoE on Alpha for me right now. It's very gratifying with the Orb Barrage. And I think Sun Fury is really going to shine in raids where like you need to burst something that's important. You need to take a mechanical approach to your DPS profile, right? I think that's where Sun Fury is really going to shine. So I definitely agree. It's probably going to be the more bursty one. Though I kind of think that everything in this rework is, maybe it's not limiting Arcane's burst profile, but I definitely think it's going to flatten it a little bit more than it is in Dragonflight, with like the stacking Lay Drinker and Aether Attunement buffs and things outside of the hero trees.
Yeah, I also think Sun Fury is going to be the better of the two. Obviously, we need to see tuning, right? The thing about like Sun Fury is, like, I read some of these talents and think like, yeah, I can see where that would be useful in a progression setting. So you've got like extra execute, you've got like potentially more burst and Arcane Surge, right? Like there are different like options here, and I'm like, yeah, I can see why that's good in progress. The issue with the like Spellslinger tree is like, I don't know how to describe this, but it strikes me, it's just like a sim tree. Like nothing, like everything is just passive damage, and it's like, well, I guess I'm just going to fire this into Simcraft and see what comes out. I mean, technically that could be better than Sun Fury, but I mean, we'll go into more detail maybe next week or the week after, but they're just not good talents.
There's no flavor in the soup.
I can't wait for the recommendation to be like, all right, if you have a certain amount of haste and mastery, you go Spellslinger because it's better mathematically, and there's no intrigue with it at all, or reason to that rhyme. Yeah,
you have Arcane Icicles, and it's just like every talent is like Arcane Icicles.
Yeah, and
a lot of fun.
Just for perspective, I could never care less about Mythic Plus. I really like raiding. That's why I play this game. And if you look at Dragonflight, especially where Arcane has dominated, we've dominated because of our timings on fights and the burst we have in those timings. Look at Dathia, look at Raz, look at, even Fyrakk to an extent, Smolderon. So anything that enhances that, I think, is going to be another reason to bring an Arcane Mage over a Frost or a Fire or whatever intellect buff you want. And so I think anything that enhances that is good for the spec, and it's something I'm going to lean into heavily.
Yeah.
So a couple of other questions, unless you had something else to add. So I just wanted to read one.
No,
A
I was going to
couple
go
of
on to
you.
another question as well.
So ARF getting lusted is definitely about echo procs and nothing else. I'm 100% sure of that. Which is one of the reasons I would consider echo and single target, perhaps. With the energized barrier, especially, or energized familiar, especially if like you're going hard on a short boss, right? Pop lust on the full and run it deep. I think the state of harmony is is that it is definitely pickable, but I think it might be more of a cleave build thing than a pure single target build or even a pure AoE build. It might kind of toe the line and be that like 2 to 4 target build that it was in early Dragonflight right after we kind of shifted toward Savant build.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out. There was a question here. Do you think Blizzard achieves its goal to reduce complexity with these reworks? I can go first. I think Blizzard's perception of like complexity and like potentially what players perceive as complex is not always the same. Like if we look at the Fire one, for example, like to me the complicated parts about Fire are like resource management, but then Blizzard seem to try and address like the amount of passive buffs you have, and it's kind of like not really sure we're on the same page here. And like with this tree, like I still think, like I said earlier in the show, like I think probably the biggest issue that new people have with Arcane is probably running out of mana, because if you run out of mana, you're just completely bricked. And this tree is like with the buffs, which is something that I identified with Fire. Like it seems like they're leaning into that even more. Like you're going to need to track even more things. They moved away from Radiant Spark, but I could just see Magi Spark being even more complicated, because Radiant Spark wasn't like, it was degenerate to min-max, but for like the average player, it's like press Radiant Spark, cast Arcane Blast 4 times. I can see this being worse, so I personally don't think so. Porum, what do you think?
No, I agree fully, actually. I think Spark is a bit of a daunting thing because there's a lot of resources talking about the problems with it, right? I've got my write-up on Wowhead. There's like macros and weak auras and shit to deal with how you approach Spark and your cooldowns. But like, I largely, I mean, realistically, right? Easy mode Arcane, you lose like 0.5% of damage in single target, not playing Spark perfectly optimally, right? It's not really the end of the world, especially with 4-piece. If you fire off a 4-piece proc into like your second Spark stack, it's not really that much damage lost overall. And so Spark, as long as like you do something during that window and you're not just sitting there idle, you're gonna consume the Spark and mostly get the a decent bit of damage out of it in return from that. But like, yeah, tracking Aether Attunement, Lay Drinker, Magi Spark, I think there's a lot of complexity there. I think Magi Spark, especially like you said, there's going to be a lot of min-max around when you barrage, as well as making sure you have an orb up to recover charges after that barrage is going to be a thing I think especially new players will struggle with when it comes to like mixed content where you are doing AoE and expending your orbs, but maybe you need to hold on to one to make sure you can use your Magi Spark early in the touch window and then recover charges, because if like you're 4 seconds into touch and you're Arcane Blasting with 0 charges, you've really fucked your damage, right? So
Yeah.
I think this actually creates more weaknesses in some ways than there were before.
Yeah. I'll let you go in a sec, G-Gen. But one thing I just wanted to comment on what you said got me thinking, like, I think like players don't understand the difference between whenever people like say, oh, how hard is this spec? And it's like, it's not really as simple as that, because you could have, okay, like this spec is this difficult to play at like optimal level. But what that question doesn't account for is, if you don't play it optimally, how far behind are you? Because you could have a spec that's really hard to play perfectly, but if you play it in easy mode, the easy mode could be very, very close to playing it optimally, or it could be quite far behind. And I think they want to like keep this difficult to optimize thing, but like pull up the, okay, how far behind am I if I don't play it optimally? Yeah, I don't know if you want to give thoughts on the rework degen, or if you think Blizzard have accomplished their goal.
I think I'm in the same boat as both of you. I think they've confused what is making Arcane complex, because they go to Wowhead and they look at Porum's 24-step opener, when in reality, you have a macro that does 8 of your steps for you. Like Porum actually recently added a simplistic version of the Arcane rotation where it's like 5 steps. I don't think it's complex. I think it's actually the easiest mage spec right now because it is a recipe that you follow step by step. And they're kind of working off the kind of outdated perception of the mage community that you need a PhD to play Arcane. I don't think that's the case currently. I don't think it's been the case for quite a while. And them adding all these stacking modifiers, I could see a world where you're playing Harmony and Magi Brand and Nether Munitions, so you're gonna time your cooldown so you have Harmony going into it, so you can barrage first stack, and then dump your other 2 spells so you get that damage bonus for the rest of your Touch of the Magi, and it's just like all this stuff adding up. And I think that really actually can increase the rotational complexity, because now you have to do setup instead of my cooldowns are up, I'm doing the scripted sequence.
I actually think Magi Spark could be toned down a lot in its complexity if they made it an or option on a couple of the spells. So instead of Arcane Blast, Missiles, and Barrage, you would do Arcane Blast or Explosion, Missiles or Orb, Barrage, right? And because Barrage is kind of that spell that toes the line between single target and AoE. But you almost never want to cast Blast or Missiles in AoE, and you almost never want to cast Explosion and Orb in single target. So I think that would kind of make it a bit more organic feeling as far as how it fits in the rotation.
Yeah, I think they're very...
You go.
I just think they're very much overstating the complexity that memorizing a set script is, versus all these additional buffs and procs that they're adding. I think they're just really swinging wide and missing on that mark.
One thing I was thinking as well is I'm assuming they have some kind of stats that are driving why they want to do this. And one thing I was thinking is something that average players struggle with the most is probably movement and maintaining DPS while moving. And Arcane has the least on-demand instance. Like, if you're moving with Frost, like, you probably have something you can press, and the same with Fire. But with Arcane, it's like, you're quite good at micro movement, but you need to, like, know what you're doing a bit more, and be, like, a bit more prepared, and know, like, it's a bit more incremental. And I think that is something that average players struggle with a lot. Like, people focus a lot on, like, rotations when it comes to difficulty, and not, like, how difficult is the rotation to execute through disruption that like raid mechanics or dungeon mechanics might throw at you. And I do think Arcane probably has the hardest time of the 3 at that particular thing, and I think that's the thing that average players are the worst at.
That's not a bad point. I played Arcane for Smolderon early on in Prague, and I really struggled doing that first burn where you have to like delay your Evo, drop the orbs all the way in the bag, then move forward, get your spark off, and then blink forward, surge. Like that was difficult. So, but I don't think this rework is accomplishing removing that.
Oh yeah, I agree. That's what I mean. I think like they're focusing on the wrong things.
I would say it's making it far worse, right? Because Palm has like a really massive challenge to taking now from a DPS perspective. And whatchamacallit, they're removing Nether Tempest, right? Which was a huge on-demand movement button that you had. It might actually end up being that we see Ice Nova make a resurgence because of that, because it fills that niche, right?
Yeah, they are removing Spark, which makes it a little bit better. Although they are making Totem longer, which then makes it worse again. It's like, yeah, if they compress the damage into a shorter window, I think that would help.
It's actually kind of ironic that they're giving up on Spark and some of these things too, because it's like Spark and Managem have received more bug fixes in the last like 2.5 years than anything else in the toolkit. And so and Nether Tempest as well, right? We just like they spent a ton, probably a bunch of dev time fixing the bugs it had early in the expansion. And so it kind of feels like, you know, they've invested something in those spells and now they're getting rid of them. So maybe good, maybe bad in that way, right? That you had some bugs that were getting worked on rather than new talents that might have all new bugs. I definitely am gonna miss Nether Tempest casting though in between spells, to be honest. Even though Nether Tempest felt like piss to cast, it still gave me something to do when I was moving.
I think they could have done a lot with Nether Tempest, like even just every tick having a 1% chance to give you a CC proc or something. Like, I like it, but
Yeah. Trying to see if there's any other questions in chat.
I like what spell is the best candidate to increase its animation size by 500%? I think that's an easy one. While I would love it to be missiles or splinters, I think Arcane Blast could use it the most. It's the most invisible spell, and having that animation actually show up would give the spell a bit more presence in the theater.
I was
What do
going
you
to say
think,
Arcane
DJ? You're
Echo.
shaking your head. Our Echo?
Arcane Echo.
That would be impressive.
I remember playing Arcane in Castle Nathria, and like my melee are just like, bro, what is this animation on the boss? Like, and then just never seen it before.
Toad's going to kick me off the podcast for saying it. Arcane Orb. Have you guys played the PvP talent Arcanosphere? That is the most satisfying bowling you've ever played. I love that spell. I wished Orb looked like that.
See, that is the one nice thing about Spellslinger is because the splinters are consumed on Nether Precision and you spend a bunch of those on Blast, it actually gives Blast a bit of an animation in the game, which is something you do actually notice playing it. So it's kind of nice.
Someone who says, if Totem had a cast time, would it be better or worse? It has had, I don't know how long you've been playing Mage, it has had a cast time in the past, but not with Arcane Surge. You can't have them both have a cast time. I think it's different. I think it's probably less degenerate. Like, you probably can't do as much stupid barrage macro nonsense with it. Although you probably don't want to do those things without Radiant Spark anyway. But yeah, you can't really have it at a cast time while Arcane Surge is in the game.
It's also there's a nifty interaction as well that we'll probably move to utilizing a lot once we get away from Radiant Spark. Is you can surge into touch with how it is now. And that works perfectly fine today. It's about 1% worse than surge than pause barrage touch. But it's an effective way to enter touch when you have no charges, which also gives Arcane a way to enter a fight with no arcane charges and go straight into cooldowns, right? Like you don't actually need to barrage into touch all the time. Like even on Smolderon on early prog when I was still kind of figuring out the timers and my paladin wasn't giving me autumn the way she was supposed to. I would just surge straight into touch just to get things moving right away, right? And get things on cooldown.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm guessing like surge into Totem is probably a lot more appealing with Radiant Spark gone, which would be nice as well.
Definitely.
How do y'all feel about the Surge cast time currently?
I don't like it.
Yeah, it's a bit long for how much damage it does.
Yeah. So Fire has our Clasm SKB procs, and like you press that button, you see the big number light up. You're like, oh cool, I did something. I press Surge, and I'm just like, well, I'm AFKing for the next whatever seconds, and then that did no damage for whatever reason, and it consumes my mana to do additional damage, but the conversion rate there is like pawn shop deals. Like there's no value there. I think that could use some love.
Yeah, to me it's like it's old Arcane Surge in that it's a damage or Arcane Power that it's a damage buff really, but they give it a cast time because they want to make like the damage feel like it matters. And it's like,
well, I think the cast time was more about getting rid of one button macros in PvP, right? That was the issue back then. was you would hit a 1-button macro that palmed or arcane powered and like did all of your shit right away, and you could just eliminate a couple of people if you had enough stacked buffs,
PvP.
right?
I
But I think
personally-
that's a big reason why they got rid of arcane power and traded it in.
Yeah,
Really
I think
PvP.
Arcane Power was much more satisfying than Surge is, especially stacked with like a Runa Power. I'm not a big fan of current Surge. I think it's too long of a cast time for too little payoff, and yeah, it sets up my window, but
I would really be happy if they upped the mana conversion to damage rate such that you wanted to go into Surge with a full bar of mana, because not only would that incentivize like that Siphon Storm into Surge combo that we all enjoyed in Season 2 Dragonflight, right? I think everyone prefers that gameplay loop over the current one. But also it would just feel better, right? If Surge hit for, you know, 1.5 million damage right now instead of whatever it's hitting, you know, 1 million damage or 800k or whatever it's hitting for, it would just feel a bit more impactful. Whereas right now, you know, without Lust, you charge up Surge, and like you said, you can like tab and change songs and go look at YouTube or whatever for a second or two.
especially if you're like a baby mage in keys. Like if you're trying to do a Surge on a trash pool in a +2, by the time it gets off, the trash is dead.
The cast time's too long, regardless of the damage or anything like that. Like if you compare it to other, like there's some cooldown, like some cooldowns are off the GCD, fine, but like some cooldowns that do something might still be instant, but they're on the GCD, like Summon Infernal or Summon Darkglare. Is Darkglare might be off the GCD actually. Infernal's on the GCD. And then you have things like Tyrant that have a cast time, but they're not that long. And it's like, well, Surge is like neither of those things. Doesn't feel that impactful, and cast time's really long.
Tyrant and Surge kind of serve a similar purpose, right? Well, Tyrant's kind of dead in the water now, but it's the same kind of idea. Like you're pulling this massive spell together to buff your next 12 seconds or whatever it is. So I don't see why there's not parity there.
Yeah.
At least some more, right? Like the Tyrant, you feel the impact of how many demons that you've summoned, right? It scales very well in that regard, and you want to pull a bunch of imps for your Tyrant cast, whereas like Surge, you don't pull mana for. You actually deliberately spend mana to avoid it calculating into your Surge cast, which is like the least intuitive thing ever for that spell, right?
Yeah, I think you don't want... I don't think you want a cast time on a cooldown that's longer than a GCD. In general.
That's not unfair.
I think, or somebody asked in chat, I think we touched on it earlier. Do you think mana management part of Arcane is still a nice part of its class fantasy, or would you like that it mattered more again, like old mastery? Porum, would you like to chime in?
I mean, I think mana management is a failed 20-year experiment for Arcane. I think in certain iterations of Arcane, it's mattered more, but I think we touched on it earlier where, like, if you want mana to matter, you have to delete cooldowns. You can't have both. It just doesn't work. One has to dictate how you spend your mana, or the other, because if you have cooldowns, you spend your mana during cooldowns. You don't give a shit about your mana outside of cooldowns because you get double damage during cooldowns, right? Likewise, if you want mana to matter, you need spending mana to generate damage more than your cooldown windows would, right? So I had the idea earlier, you know, if you want mana to matter, you need a stacking buff when you spend it. That makes you do more damage, so that way you're incentivized to like tank your mana pool in a short period of time. That presents a lot of problems for the profile when it comes to like raid encounters, where you can kind of dictate, hey, we have a problem in this raid. Who has a 30-second cooldown? Who's got a minute cooldown? Who's got a 2-minute cooldown? Arcane can just raise their hand at every point if you make mana matter too much. And I don't know that that's really healthy either. Game design, in my opinion, I think you just abandon mana and full send Arcane the way it is. I think it would actually be beneficial if Arcane had a similar mana resource to Fire and Frost and had a separate resource for specifically damage spells, such that there was a bit more parity in utility. For example, like the staff from Ashara comes to mind, right? Where you would spell steal spam as fire to trigger it. You couldn't do that as Arcane. You had to tank your mana. And if you were in corruption gear with mastery, that could take you some minutes to do. You know what I mean? Like it was it was a point of frustration more than it was a boon. Granted in again to to draw your ire. In PvP, there's implications there, right? Arcane is one of the only specs in the game that can spam the spell, which is out of parity with other parts of the other specs.
Don't need to go to PvP for that. That was relevant on, was it Zul? Yeah, like playing an Arcane Mage because you needed spell steal so much that a Frost Mage couldn't do it, or something like that.
Even like Vortex Pinnacle in Season 1 or whatever it was, all the little guys with the shields.
Or I think of, what was it, Council Enclave or whatever in BOD, the one that you spell stole the haste buff off of. As Fire, not only did the spell steal tax your mana, but then you got the haste and you ran from casting fireballs and pyros so quickly. And so it was like a compounding problem there. And yeah, like I've said before too, I think there's also difficulties with tying mana regen formulas for Arcane in with the same mana regen formulas that like a Mistweaver or Resto Shaman uses. And I think that creates some like complexities there that they haven't really ever figured out or solved for.
Yeah, but the TLDR for me for that question is, mana and CDs can't coexist. Mana needs to be your CD. Like dumping mana is your CD, and then you like evo it back or something. But yeah, that's not going to work. Well, CDs are in the game. Okay, I'm extremely tired. Let's do one more question. Would you say spending mana during Surge was a good tier set? I didn't like it because I didn't like how polarizing it was. Like if you got a haste buff, let's see, like Temporal Warp, it would be, you would spend more mana during your CDs. So you're doing more damage because you like are casting more spells, but then you also get a bigger damage buff because you've cast more spells, and it's like a feedback loop that I think was kind of unhealthy. I'm glad that one hasn't made a comeback.
Yeah, things like that definitely raise the skill ceiling in sometimes an unhealthy way when they compound on each other like that. I think also when it comes to spending mana in Surge, it also ran into that problem of AoE versus single target mana spend for Arcane, right? So like tier 30 was really, it was decent for single target, and it was pretty bad in AoE. And ultimately, I honestly saw that set more as like a quality of life fix more than anything else. And I'm, in some ways, I kind of hope that improved touch and nether munitions combo in the rework have some effect on that and allow players to have that tier 30 design through those talents, because it extends the touch of the Magi damage window a bit further, right?
And on your note between parity and AoE and single target and mana consumption, if you're going to keep mana around, give Barrage a mana cost, please and thank you, so I can get some CC procs.
Yeah, even a trivial mana cost like a la Counterspell or something like that would still have a small chance to proc.
I know I said I do want to go, but what do you think of Arcane Explosion interacting with Arcane Charges in the same way that Blast does, like more damage, more mana cost per charge? Did you like that in Legion?
I loved it in Legion. Legion Arcane is the version of the spec that I originally knew and loved, and I degenerately spamming Arcane Explosion and like single target during Tomb of Sargeras and the AoE rotation in some dungeons was pretty stupid, but it wasn't unfun. I'm not sure if I feel like the charges, I'm not sure if I feel like the charge gain or rather relying on charges for that is a super great thing.
I think just when you talk about like mana spend differing so much between
Yeah,
single target and AoE.
it
It is
was
like
really
a
nice.
easy fix.
That was one of the things in Legion that was actually really nice too, was when you barrage, you could Arcane Explosion for like no fucking mana at all, right? When you were completely and get a couple of get a couple of charges quickly like that, rather than casting the really slow Arcane Blast at 0 charges.
Yeah.
I've been playing Temporal Anomaly in Mythic Plus as Arcane, and I never drop below 90% mana. It's kind of wild. Mana doesn't exist in keys.
Speaking of, it's actually the I know, Toad, you just keep dragging it out. The
I'm
the
going
one
to
thing
pass
we
out.
haven't the one thing we really haven't touched on in this cast now is the temporal warp removal and the time anomaly becoming a default. That's definitely going to have a large impact on clear casting generation, especially in AoE, where you seldom have a clear casting charge for very long, if you have it at all. And so it'll be more likely to proc overall than it is in single target. Additionally, like Degen said, I think that'll solve a lot of mana problems. To your point about the complexity of the spec, I think, although it'll be a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because if you get a surge proc, your mana problems are solved for life. If you get a lust proc, maybe they're not.
Yeah. I think like if TA is going to be about like just make a proc your cooldown, stop this other stuff.
Yeah, I'd
Yeah.
almost prefer it just proc your proc and not the cooldown
that
or
too.
lust, and just do like clear casting fire blast and figures of frost or flurry, really is what it probably should do, right?
Yeah. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. So next week we'll not be doing this time slot. We'll be doing Saturday at 2:30 Eastern time, or what was that, 6:30? No, 8:30 European time. So yeah, that'll be on the Saturday. And yeah, it'll be uploaded to YouTube as well. So yeah, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Porum and Degen, as always. And thank you everybody in chat. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.